way this is going to work here is we have our technology friends up here, and we're going to ask the facilitators to facilitate. We've asked you to come up with 3 ideas from each group. There, I suspect duplication. So if it's a duplicate idea, just say duplicate. We don't need to go through that. And somewhat succinctly and with as much specificity as you can, share the idea. Hannah, come up and hand Hannah the sticky, and then we will ask some questions. We'll ask our panelists here to ask some questions for clarification or to get as granular as we can. The idea is to really get as granular as we can on this, okay? So I'm going to leave a microphone here, and then you can share it with over there.
Let's start. All right, I'll start here. Our first card, we have 4 cards. We kind of cheated. So our first card is Discoverability. I still need to read it here. The outcome is delivering services in the language of the user. And Thomas Bodden kind of gave us the 4-part structure of our cards. The action would be to develop metadata search criteria related to social services, such that it can be found by search engines or introspected by federated agencies. But the idea is that this data is you can find it. It's not buried somewhere behind a firewall. How long should I spend on this? Just kind of quickly go through. Okay. That's a medium-term objective, we thought, but yeah. No. Separate topic, yeah. Okay. Usability, that the services are able to be actually used. The outcome is improved and consistent human interfaces, interface potential. So you should be able to bring your own device to the table, and you should be able to kind of consistently get to the information you're seeking. The action is to harmonize technology standards with the business need, and we thought that was more of a long-term goal in the sense that it's going to take some detailed interface specification, but other people might interpret it differently as a nearer goal. The third one is shared services. This one, the outcome is to put shared governance around existing systems and then build them in a consistent fashion with gateways that, as Don Edwards was describing, gateways to allow disparate systems in human services to talk with each other. It doesn't matter if you're DOL or HUD, the gateway is similar between them, so the information can route. So the action would be to develop pilots, best practices on the first pilot flow into the second pilot, and move forward like that. And shared services in the sense that we're not, re-procuring the same thing a billion times over, done a billion different ways, and then it doesn't operate. So we're hoping that there's a lot of coordination around shared services. And the fourth is one very close to my heart, is information interoperability. The outcome is that all service providers can see and understand and reference each other's terminology, each other's vocabulary. So we're all speaking the same language. The action is to, each subdomain publishes linked open vocabularies. If you Google LOV, it'll show up all the different ones out there. We propose that NICIA, the National Human Services Interoperability Architecture, does a core normalization then of all those posted vocabularies. So each agency tomorrow puts their vocabularies on the web in linked open data, and then we start to, over time, harmonize those. 2 different definitions for a household. HUD's is very much centered around who shows up for services together, even though they're not really a family or not really a household in a conventional sense, whereas other agencies have a more normal definition of a household that we might all use, the mom and dad and children sort of household definition. Well, those 2 both can be posted with references. One came from HUD, one came not from HUD, from HHS, and we know what we're talking about when we're using a specific term. Over time, we can come up with a NICIA normalization of those, so it's maybe pull out the common parts of it and then say, well, HUD's is more specific than the core NICIA one. And it's essentially what NEAM does with their NEAM core already. They've done this with the XML schema they've made. They have a core schema, and then all the different domains have their specializations from that. That we think is a short-term one. We should be able to get that done really soon. I offered to do one agency's last night. I retract that, or overnight I would be able to finish it, and I totally retract it. I'm not going to do that tonight. I'm going to sleep. And then one idea from Ross, Martin, is that we post these things all on instead of silo.gov, to data.gov, so that it doesn't matter which area, not even human services, health, or wherever you're coming from, it's all posted. So that's what I got. Our group had. Thank you so much, everyone.
Any clarifying comments from the technical team on that? Captured okay? All right. And you want to finish on the technology? Take a few minutes. We have some time constraints, so if you can summarize here.
I'll be quick, I hope. So the first thing we want to do, we're proposing, is a demonstration project that would show the impact of information sharing in a specific problem domain, a small one, so we can start small. And the idea would be sharing data across federal agencies, states, open data, everything related to solving, to making some impact on a particular problem, so that at the end of this we have something to show. So here's, yeah, that one. So basically we're talking about a kind of a mashup. Like Google talked about don't integrate, and so that we're kind of taking that seriously. On the other hand, we now need to figure out how to make the data actionable. A mashup itself isn't actionable for any particular project, so we're now talking about applying data standards after the mashup, post-mashup, not beforehand. So we're trying to eliminate the need, some of the political, basically walk around some of the political and organizational boundaries that would be there to making this kind of recommendation. But we need standards. Ultimately, we need standards to make something happen. So that's where they'd be applied. NEAM is obviously a candidate for a standard to use that, though I do know a lot of younger developers will scream about XML and want JSON, but we'll let that slide. Okay. And then finally, we're suggesting that Jessica, excuse me, this is actually a direct suggestion to you, which is that you require social impact statements for basically any kind of federal grants, but that would be one of the things that we would have to show as the project. So it's the impact, the social impact across all the domains that what solving this problem is, we would have to be part of the evaluation. And we've also talked about making this data available to some researchers, who may do a lot of very creative ideas on that, but to get this down to the point where we've done something, we've shown it, and we've shown the impact. So that's the idea.
Thank you, Ivan. Any comments from the rest of the team on clarifying those issues? Okay, I think now we want to open it to the federal and state folks here.
So I thought that was great. I loved both what I heard, and you both also talked about NEAM, and that's a great way to pander to me. If I was wearing my lanyard, it would be a NEAM lanyard. But I related to that, I would encourage you to look at NEAM UML. So that's where NEAM is going, and actually there's been some really good work that's nascent that maybe this community can help elevate around a broker between HL7 and NEAM UML. That was some work that's been done out of the Veterans Administration, and it goes back to, I think Damon made the comment about there's lots of goodness, pockets of goodness across the federal government, and there's more we can do to integrate that. So I would encourage the information modeling to happen in NEAM UML using those tools. It's aligned with the mainstream of industry, and it might be a hook into some of the work at the Veterans Administration that's around that, the HL7 NEAM broker. Oh, he said the same thing? Okay, well that's good. So if Hunt says it, it must be true.
So I wanted to build on, first I really loved one of the comments that was made about a demo in a specific problem domain. So we literally just 2 days ago out of the CTO's office in conjunction with the United Kingdom decided the very same thing. We had about 4 different work streams that were focused on data sharing and clinical quality measures and all these other kinds of things, and they were all very sort of siloed activities. And what we realized was we needed to focus in on one specific demonstration of how all of those collective activities could make something meaningful happen in a specific area, and we recently decided on obesity. But the point being, having that strategic focus on what all of the collective efforts is going to be, I think is incredibly valuable. I wanted to hit on something else, which was it seemed like there was a little bit of an alignment between the information interoperability and the social service metadata piece. It seems like those two are very, very closely aligned. I wanted to ask just one quick question, which was with the social services, with shared services, I think the first gentleman brought up, what would be sort of your top 3 shared services that you would did you guys discuss, like, where are 1 or 2 of the ones that we would have to hit on first? So you may not necessarily have an answer for that right now, but I think if we're going to be granular and detailed about this, perhaps a next step for the folks in that group and for the broader group here would be to literally think, like, if we were going to make a significant impact, much the same way we talked about with the demo project, what is something that you would absolutely want to see some shared services on and start to fight for that cause to actually come to fruition? So I think those are great ideas.
We did have one that came out. It was like the gateway, the common gateway that would. I'm sorry. We did have just one that maybe we have some more, but one that was vocalized was that a gateway, a common gateway that would be able to receive messages from whatever agency, in the sense that if it came from a different agency than the one that was receiving it, it wouldn't be seen as a foreign object. We would know where it came from, and it would reference where its terms came from, so that it wouldn't be just discarded offhand. And so something like that would be very helpful across all government, really, is just a common gateway.
I got it. I would suggest 2 shared services. One would be ID management as one to show, and then the other would be either provider enrollments, if you want to look at it on the provider side, or continue on the eligibility path, because there's still a long way to go around eligibility for all of these programs, and a lot of redundant consumer involvement in those pieces. But I wanted to share with you something that we're planning to do. How many people here, first of all, work for a state? All right, that's a good size. So how many are aware of what we call transformed MSIS, or TMSIS, right? So this is the, states have always had to give us Medicaid statistical data, and it's generally been years old by the time we get it, and in an incomplete data set and not well harmonized. So transformed MSIS is this new data set that I've been referencing this morning, where we will be getting through a very standardized data dictionary, the encounter data, the provider data, the beneficiary data, the claims data, and the third-party liability data. And I wanted to just make sure everybody was very clear that as we get it, we are going to surface it. So the goal is to put it through something, Damon will hook me up, one of the .govs, in raw format, so that people could mash it with whatever they want to mash it, and the data dictionary and all those things will be made available. And then we're also going to use it to generate the kinds of reports and things that we think are interesting, and put those on Medicaid.gov. And we're going to do that as we get it. So that means if states send us incomplete schlock, that's what's going out in the web. So then they can tell their stakeholders why their data is incomplete schlock, because we have a requirement that we get a full, robust data set. And what you give us is going out there. And if hopefully that will generate a little bit more pressure to improve the data set. I'm going to call it schlock, right? I'm going to yiddishify everything in this process. So it's really just so descriptive. It's so, you just can't find an equivalent. Anyway. Yes. Well, your managed care providers, exactly, those who you depend on to get that data. And also your academic institutions and others who really want to do that kinds of analysis, your legislative bodies that want to take that data and look at the cost trends and compare and benchmark themselves to other states who have similar models or different models around their cost trends, and how come this state can give us this data in this format and others can't. It's going to be on a monthly basis. And so we'll have both the raw data available as well as some canned reports and other kinds of analyses. And we're not going to wait until it's great. Because we don't have that luxury, and I think we're going to have some really interesting analysis. We have a lot of states lined up to give us a really shockingly high percentage of the data elements and to give them to us always. Like, that's one of our criteria, not just you give it to us, but it's something you can consistently give us every single month so that you can do longitudinal analyses of that data. And we're migrating the past 3 years of MSIS data over as well. So now you're not just looking at what starts for the July 2014 year moving forward, but you'd also be able to take that from the 3 years prior for those data elements that are consistent and look at something more robust rather than waiting for 4 years to do that. So I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that was going to be available so that you can think about how to plug that data in to any of these discussions and these tools and pieces that you want to do, and it might help inform what kind of demonstrations and things you'd want to do.
So that's going to be available on healthdata.gov?
You say so. You had identity management, and the other was either provider enrollment or eligibility. So eligibility on the beneficiary side and provide identity management.
We also want to speak to the potential leveraging as we ask questions against that data through analytics. Now that we've got the standard data set, if we build something in Minnesota that answers a question and someone asks a different question and has an answer, we can leverage each other's question and answer instruments.
Yeah, Tom,
Yeah, somebody had a really good, and I'll repeat Tom's question in a second, but Damon, I think it was you. So and I wrote it down because I like the way you phrased it. You were talking about, demand aggregation forum. So I want to have that for the question and answer so that we can start to aggregate and show the kinds of queries that people are doing. Because otherwise, what I understand you to say is that this data is there, but you're not always sure how it's being used and what's being innovated off of it and who's asking the question in one way versus in another way. And so we want to make sure we have that support there to track how people are using the data, what kinds of tools they have. We're going to have our own tools through a SaaS suite, but other people might have something else they're very excited about. And so that's a really important piece, right? Because then we won't ever know whether you're actually using it to change the way you deliver services.
When is that TOC data going live? What's that first release?
So states will start to give us the July data in August, the first set of states. Yeah.
Well, I think Tom actually preempted my question a little bit, but what I was going to ask is, so you've got one demonstration project here, and you or Ivan do it. You know, I'm from that part of the South that was bad on the map. You know, we get to things late, we're not educated, and, you know, not much future. Yeah, I mean, that graphic representation really cut to the quick. But so how do we learn from that? And when you build your design for this study that you're going to apply for money and you're hoping Joe or somebody will fund it, what are you going to put in here that improves the odds that others will learn from the mistakes that you are going to make while you're doing this? And when you start down the wrong road the first 3 times, how are you going to get this project done? How are you going to convince people that it isn't going to be just straight? With all due respect to the technology folks, at least in Virginia, because we're in that part of the state that, you know, I'm sorry, I'm dwelling on that, but it's not ever a smooth path. And folks like me start getting the heat and where's the money going? And, you know, now suppose we get to the end of the project and you've got a nice tool, but you now haven't been able to use it for anything. Then what happens? How do you deal with that?
So I think what you're asking for is good, but I think there's 2 things to say here. One, we want to make sure we pick a small domain, because if we take something too big, the risk gets too big. We want something small so we can be agile. And that also means that the assessments have to be going on continuously so we can correct things. I think, you know, there's an art here to picking this, and I don't think it's trivial. But I think the concerns you have to be really in the forefront of our minds if we're going to pick a demonstration, because you just can't pick something that sounds good. You've got to have some really good ideas about why you're going to be successful, where the possibilities of, you know, problems are, and how we're going to mitigate them. Otherwise, yeah, you're right, not much. But if we get any kind of success, it should be reusable, right? That's what we mean by institutionalized. It's got to be reusable.
Well, let me approach this from the standpoint that there was an orphan, and that was the confidentiality and legal. I would suggest that your discoverability and your information interoperability are very, very closely related. I mean, joined at the hip almost. If you're going to do and try to use metadata around your XML to try to describe that and provide that discoverability, then expand that metadata to identify who's authorized to use and access through that discoverability, access that data, and then create a real-time index of those codes that say child support can have it, CMS can't, foster care can have it, food stamps can't, but this piece of data. And that metadata can describe that piece of data that can or can't be shared. You can have hundreds of combinations. So metadata is not just 5 items, for example. But you can implement that through your information interoperability using NEAM, modeling it with UML, but using your XML. NEAM uses XML. I mean, there's variations of XML. You got business reporting language, et cetera. But the combination of those two gets you there. And it addresses that major issue that everybody deals with and doesn't know how to deal with, and that is that confidentiality and allowability of data sharing. And you do that through this right here. That might solve a huge problem after you get the lawyers out of the room.
Ready? Oh, one more. Sure. Sure.
We're talking about shared capabilities and access management and discoverability, and I think we're onto something here, and I would highlight that there's a rich body of knowledge around the specific capabilities that would allow for federated identity and capability management, and we actually did a pilot on something called a back-end attribute exchange, which actually implemented access and discovery around a certain class of law enforcement intelligence, criminal intelligence, where you need to have certain privacy protections around using and accessing that information. And we did this pilot with the Texas Department of Public Safety, several federal agencies. We actually funded it with the General Services Administration, because that seemed like the right place to do a shared services around this kind of thing. So it may be an easier path to execute on some of these things, and something that I would really encourage is the shared capabilities around access management. I think that's critical to being able to automate policy, which is a key issue.
Wish you could apply it to all the SAMHSA exempt stuff that we in HIE that messes it all up.
Okay, want to thank the technology folks for the input. Appreciate that. Now, if we could have our folks at the table stay here, and now if we could bring the governance team, the speakers for the governance team, and some of the governance providers that can sit around the chairs.
While we're making the transition, I just want to also remind people that one of the things we're going to do is we're going to distill this down after this session, and we're going to get ready to bring this back out into another conversation at the MESC conference in August. Right, so this is going to be repurposed in August at MESC to begin to bring this into the Medicaid technology world. And so we'll also be going out and asking, we'll be communicating with you about those of you who want to fill out, fill in, and sort of edit and participate in the distillation of this work. So it just won't be our work, it'll be the community and also the folks who've worked on these particular topics, okay? So we're going to just capture it here, synthesize it, and as we did a couple years ago, create a report that will be useful and usable across the community. And let me turn it over to Emmanuel.
Hi, so we were one group from the governance team, and so our first and what we felt was probably the most important thing we'd like to say is the feds should play a role to establish end goals to work towards with incentives, of course. And what we mean by that is, for example, of saying to states, you should come up, that there should be a 3-4-50 rule, but not telling them you must have 3-4-50 in your state, but come up with your own version of it that works for your community. That was first one. Oops, sorry. The second one is transforming a vision statement into an operational culture, whether it's, at end of year 1, see this happening, end of year 3, we expect to see this, end of year 5, this is where what we're expecting, going back to that 3, 4, 50 vision that each of the states has created for itself. And finally, communicate the why, a communication campaign so that people understand why this is so important to do and to have. That's it.
So our group had 4, so we cheated a little too. The first one was interoperability is a means to an end. So we need to identify that end. That's what's going to drive people. Interoperability is kind of a concept, but we want people to be driven by a specific goal that's right for customers, that's right for communities. And then you want a government structure that drives priorities, and that's going to lead to redirected funding. So you want something where we're identifying the priorities, what's our first priority in interoperability. We can't do everything all at once, and we need something that's actually going to drive a state to redirect funding towards interoperability. And then we want authentic voices at the table, so not just your cabinet secretaries, but some subject matter experts who do the work to be at the table. Yes. So in addition to cabinet secretaries whose voices are very authentic, we would also like all voices, it says it, all voices. So you want authentic voices, you want folks at the table who are subject matter experts in the operations in your programs to be at the table and focus on what, not just who. And also consumers and your advocates, so community voices at the table also. And then we had one headline that was a part of the instructions, and it's your data, utilize it for service. So
the point for all this is we've been speaking for years. We have to have standards, we have to have data, we have to change funding. Well, one way to try to change the conversation is to identify that what we're doing, what meaningful use is and everything else is, to meaningfully use the data for the people that we serve. So to turn the conversation around, to get them involved, say, it's your data. How do you want us to use it to make your community healthier? What are your goals and needs? Instead of the wonderful cabinet secretaries and other political people, what is the community asking for? And if we don't ask them and remind them that what we're doing is for them, then we're just going to keep going in these circles. So that's where it came from. Okay.
Any other input? Sure.
I wonder if that doesn't belong under communicate the why. Because we want to serve the people who are the end users. That's why, because it's about them. That's why.
And actually, if we can twist the word a little bit, it's your data, let's all use it for service. Meaning, yeah, we'll let those secretaries do some stuff, but also the people in the field, the people themselves, commercial folks should use it, the boots on the ground should use it. Everybody can have access to it for betterment.
Okay. Anything else? Any other additions or clarifications from the team? Turn it over to the people at the tables.
One of the things that was mentioned earlier. All right, sorry about that. So one of the things that was mentioned very early on was the vision to operational culture and sort of what it suggested to me, along with something else with the interoperability as a means to an end. Both of those sounded like something that came up in our conversation on the stage, where we talked a little bit about needing to have the flexibility to have iterative approaches to things, So the reason I say that is because the vision to operational culture, you can have a vision that's very, very clear in the very beginning that changes drastically, potentially, as you get to the end. And if you're stuck with what you've dictated in the beginning, you've got some real challenges to surmount along the way if you are going to manage culture, do change management as we discussed, and things along those lines. So I think one of the things that we have to do, and this is across the board with the way we procure software to support some of these needs, with the way that we report in on how things have been, on the successes that we've seen or what have you. We have to have a little bit of wiggle room to say, this is what we found so far. We feel like we need to take a slight redirection on our strategic approach because here's what we have learned. And I think it's really valuable to sort of understand that those building in iterative processes versus the long-term vision and then having to commit to that is really important.
I was just going to say, for our group, when we said vision statement, it's to incorporate the whole enterprise. We're not talking, so it's not just the objectives. So the objectives might be the 1 year we would like to see this, 3 year we see this out, and 5 year we see this out. But also at the end, when you get there, it's also going back to your procurement offices and making the changes in the language there that need to be made that said, we need to have shared data, and this becomes something that you do for all future projects. You have shared legal language, security language that's changed. So that's the long term, but you have these short, medium, and long-term goals, in, objectives as part of the entire process.
Since I'm inauthentic, I need to think for a little bit. You know, and I will deal with you, Mr. Worth, later.
If I, Bill, Bill, if you would you answer for everyone the question that I asked you, which is how to institutionalize some of the governance that is put in place when there's people like yourself who are very committed to this, but how do you make sure that it has legs in the long term?
There are several things to that. And first is that I think you do start with the strategic plan. And sorry, we did start with the strategic plan. It may start with the vision, but unless that vision is shared and owned by a lot of people and it's sort of in the culture, it doesn't stand much chance even when an organization supports it, because we see a lot of organizations that are ineffective. So one is getting it there, getting it where your leadership is invested in it and participating, as well as the folks who are doing the work and your stakeholders who are expecting to have the information, the tool, whatever it is that you're producing. Promised something that is useful, and when there is use, there are people who want it, and they will become your advocates for it. So from a functional standpoint, those are things that you need to put into place. I think the other thing is the roadmap. You've got your strategic plan, but your steps, so that when you do have transitions, you can hand off and people can pick up. Not everybody leaves at the same time, and is in your team, when transitions, and I've just been through a huge one, these projects are more like battleships. For the sailor next to you, he'll understand that, but they go on in absence of any leadership at the top for some time until you actually need leadership to make decisions. So you program it into the bureaucracy. And then I think the other thing is that there are certain public statements like executive orders, executive directors that a governor can do and write that get picked up by the next administration. They get renewed, and that is an opportunity to sort of institutionalize things that aren't necessarily written in code or statute. And now Mike will tell you what I meant to say.
In addition, Jess, one of the things that we've done in Virginia, and frankly from the beginning, is we did start a very intentional communication effort. We started publicly saying, this is what we're going to do. We have a monthly newsletter on EHHR. And the amazing thing is it started as internal distribution, and then it also now has external distribution. And I can tell you, once we say we're going to do something, it's a lot harder to pull it back in the future. One other mechanical piece that I'd like to share with people that I give the secretary huge props for doing. It was inauthentic, though. And when it looked, he had the vision 3 years ago to know that he might not make it through the next transition. So on his instruction, what we did is we worked with agency leadership, and we took key elements of the strategic plan, and we wrote it into their job definitions, so that even if he didn't stay around, and even if they didn't stay around, the position that the next guy or girl would occupy would have those key elements in it until they got around to writing them out.
Which I figured would take a while.
In state government, yes.
I guess I'd ask, how do you incentivize governance, communications? At some point, I mean, you're always going to have resistance to change. You're going to have that passive-aggressive behaviors that go along with that resistance to change and the inertia that goes along with that. You got to incentivize it somehow. And you've got a carrot and a stick. And yes, Bill can use his authentic voice as a carrot or a stick.
My authentic voice is the pain one.
Yeah. Docs know how to bring pain too, I guess. But I would encourage you to try to figure that part of it out. You know, is there some way that a program can get a few extra bucks out of some pot of money that maybe the department has for special projects, or something that's near and dear to some commissioner's heart, you know, in juvenile justice or child welfare or whatever it may be, that you get on board here and make this happen, and I'll make sure that happens for you, okay? And that, because you have leaders in all these programs, some better than others, but if you get them in a room and they're all singing from the same sheet of music, that usually takes some reason for them to want to do that, and that's an incentive. And I would
Joe,
just wonder how.
What we have done is, and Mike hit on that, I forgot about it, but it starts with the agency head. And we started in Virginia with something called an employee work profile. And I basically took the agency head plan and I converted it to an agency work plan. So it starts at the agency head, and the goals that I want are in that person's plan, and they're divided in such a way as that they can be distributed. So in one of my areas is technology, and their performance, they are responsible for ensuring that they follow our strategic plans related to technology. And I meet with every agency head quarterly and their leadership teams, and we have the discussion, how are you doing? You know, are the goals being met? And we know whether they're on target or not, but they give that to the people who are involved in technology, and that becomes part of their performance reviews too. And so when you're looking at your employee performance, are they following the plan is part of the evaluation. Now, the goal over the last few years had been to implement a bonus system in Virginia for folks who are who were higher performers. There are pros and cons to that. The biggest con is that they always set these up, but they never fund them, or they fund them out of year-end savings. So there are some traps around that. I haven't figured a way to use project money. I don't know that Jess would want to give me a lot of money to bonus high-performing employees, but we could try it. I'd be happy to pilot that for you. But we do try to put it into the performance and ensure, and we got our human resources people meeting regularly and have tried to create some consistency across employee evaluation, ensuring that they're getting done timely. And an example, when I got here, we had an agency 1,600 people, and there were only 3 who were not performing to standard in that. And now, part of the reason is people who aren't lose along the way, so it is a smaller number than one would expect. But that's how we try to enforce these things.
And I would encourage you to also think about from Incentivize. What you can do is, it's not just about money. It's not just about dollars, although I find that to be really effective. But for example, in child welfare, where you have just a monstrously burdensome caseload because these workers can't handle that many cases. This is not child support where each worker has 1,000 cases that they work. They might have 25, 30, because they're doing home visits. They're going to be responsible for the welfare and the protection of a child, okay, in a foster home, in a placement home. But if you can sit there and reduce their workload somehow through shared services, as we talked about in the previous one, if you can incentivize them to say, look, I can reduce your workload by 10% or 15%, and I won't take any staff away from you, that's a real incentive for a lot of programs that gets buy-in at the work level up instead of top down.
I'm going to have a question to take it back up a level. Governance at the state level obviously is critically important to align incentives and programs. I'm wondering, is there any examples at the federal level where you've asked for, as part of the APD or as part of the requirements, what's your governance structure, especially around interoperability, to have the state actually respond to a new way of thinking about governance, especially if we're asking to cut across multiple agencies, forcing them, in a sense, for Dr. Hazel, to actually address that need in some incentivized way?
We do ask about the organizational structure and the governance structure, but honestly, I don't know how easy it is for us to assess what we're told in paper. You know, we get an org chart, we get told how many meetings are held, the kinds of people who are held the meetings. You know, these people are voting members, these people are, you know, ex officio, and yeah, that doesn't really tell me whether it's happening the way it's supposed to happen. You know, they appoint one or two consumers, but do they listen to them? So that's the struggle for us, honestly, is how do we know what questions to ask and people can answer it, and it's hard for us to really understand what's a good answer to that, because it really has to do with what's happening in practice, not what they're planning to do. So some of the lessons learned we've had, for one thing, now we proactively are starting to ask about the process in place for conflict resolution. So not just what do you do for good governance, but let's just face it, we're humans, and these are complicated projects with people with lots of competing priorities. So what is your plan going to be across your agencies to resolve conflicts? Like, who gets to call it, what gets mediated? We actually have to ask these things now, because we've seen months and months be lost while everybody's just fussing over the same questions, or they revisit things that were already decided and nobody just stays allegiant to the decisions that were already made. So if anyone has ideas about how to better inform ourselves about what's a good governance model that we're being told versus a not so great governance model, we're definitely open to it. Help us learn how to ask it in a better way, or evaluate the responses in a better way.
So one of the things that you guys have funded, actually out of the OMB ACF grant, was a governance model. There was a lot of work on, Illinois had to leave, but there is now a national resource document that surveyed and worked with a lot of people who worked with that. So it's almost like, how do you take that tool that's already, it's $1 million investment, and make that, I don't know the answer, but this may be one of the questions we have, is how do you operationalize that deliverable that we've all paid for, and came out of OMB, to embed that somewhere? I don't know if there's an answer to that, but there certainly was a lot of work, and California has, it's been trying to take those models and to put them throughout the structure in the state. So.
Well, just kind of to Jessica's question, one of the things that I always ask is when I usually have monthly or bi-monthly calls with state agencies, and I always ask the question, why? This is a multi-agency project, and there's players missing. Where are they? They're not even at these meetings, whatever staff level you're talking about, and that gives you an insight into how much they're vested in the project. If we had the time and money, we've done it in a few projects. We've gone and visited up front when we're first looking at the APD and met with at the head, the senior level management in each agency that's involved, to just get an idea if they really have that there's a project going on and how vested they are.
Yeah, I would think that part of the leadership and the governance is not just the auditing and being sure that it's followed, but it's modeling the behaviors that you're looking for. And that, the frustration that we get into is when we have, say, below the agency head level, information security officers from two agencies, they've got a different set of roles they're looking at. They've got your set of roles, they got the IRS set of roles, they got the Medicaid set of roles, or whatever they are. And when they can meet, they don't have the authority necessarily to compromise because they know they're told to do it because it's the federal regulation. So to kind of come back, what we really, the thing that would encourage that interagency work the most are visible, federal agreements on how we're going to solve these particular problems that every single one of us has every day. What do you do with that IRS data? I mean, I think, Joe, probably you've got some answers to that, but the sooner that those answers come out clearly from above, it makes it easier for our people to say, we can live with that, and that would help us a lot.
I was just going to say for the county administered states, I'm from NACO, so representing the county governments, they would say, ask the states if they've been to the table, because there are some counties that are using 2 different state Medicaid systems right now to enroll people, and people are going to get dropped through the cracks, unfortunately. And their perspective is that this wouldn't have happened had they been brought to the table from the beginning, because if they're they're determining eligibility, they're doing enrollment, why not say, what is it that you need, or what would make the system work better from the very beginning if you had them, or during the process, per se?
Jerry?
I don't know whether I should go here or not. It's hard when you put little pieces up on the poster board there to kind of capture the richness of the discussion, but we really had a very rich and honest discussion about governance, about the missed opportunity, especially through the A87 exception waiver. We had an opportunity to really build interoperable systems. And for the most part, you have to look back and say we didn't get there. And so what are the reasons? And I think Jess hit on it a lot today with the governance. But it's not just, setting up an organizational chart. It's not just forming committees. It's really having the end purpose in mind and aligning the various functional levels of experience, expertise, commitment, and passion in order to make that happen. And I think sometimes that's missing from a governance model. A really strong charter, an agreement on the terms that you need to communicate. Those are kind of basic things that sometimes we take for granted, and I know that I have been guilty of that. Governance is one of the last steps, it should be really one of the first steps. And so, as we look, I hope that we can learn from this whole ACA experience, the places that worked and the places that didn't work. And in all honesty, I don't think we learned anything new. We knew that we didn't have governance achieve the levels that it needed to, the decision-making, the timeliness, the really thoughtful discussions. And Dr. Hazel, what we meant by authentic voice, and I'm probably the culprit for this, because I've seen this before. You establish end-user groups, but in many cases, you're filling out a dance card. You're not often listening as much, from a project management perspective, and that's what we were trying to address, and maybe that wasn't the best terms. But when you look at what happened, it was governance failure, it was a failure of really having executive leadership and commitment. Everybody was in charge, nobody was in charge. It was business not talking effectively to technology and vice versa. It was not really utilizing standard project management, listening to the quality control. Those are the kind of things that we all knew, and we have known this for decades as we've been trying to put systems together. And somehow we had this opportunity. So I just hope that we can use this all as a learning experience as we move forward. And Jess, I was delighted to hear you talk about governance needs to be a consideration. And we need to get better at articulating that for you so that you and Joe and the other funders in the room make sure that we're achieving what we say that we're going to achieve. And the other purpose, the other thing, is that we need to keep the end game in mind. We're doing this to provide a better human services system, a stronger safety net. And sometimes we get caught up in all of the other discussions and forget that. It really is about being client-focused.
Okay. What, last comment?
I have to respond to that at least a little bit, because I think for me, and what you get with the secretary at that level is someone who is in a new position. There's no school for secretaries. Those of you who've been here understand that. And you do rely on the people that are there when you get in place, and then you try to learn and you come to groups and so forth and pick it up. So what I would say about the A87 is, at least for us, I think we've learned a lot. Whether we have institutionalized that learning yet and made it so that it can be shared, I don't know, but I don't think we would have had this conversation 3 years ago because we haven't had that experience done. Just speaking in Virginia, as we have pulled people in and others have gotten interested, we have learned how to make it work better. We know where more of the traps are, and it is my sincere hope that A87 will be extended, and if it's modified, that's great, to build in some of the things, the learning that you want to see. So the challenge maybe going forward this year as we look at extending 87 is say, under what conditions should we extend it? What have you learned from this? What will be reflected in the extension and things like that? But I think that this is experience that needs to be captured and sort of institutionalized as we go forward, but we shouldn't do away with it.
We hate getting new work, but one of the things, me and Jess are just canoodling over here, and one of the things we realize is for these integrated projects especially, we think maybe a planning phase deliverable that we should start requiring is the project charter. Not expect that you'll do one because you're using good project management professional, goals and you're doing the key process areas and all. No. We don't care that you're hiring PMPs or not. We're going to help you by requiring project charters. I think that might actually kick the governance process, at least in the seat of the pants, so it gets moving.
Okay, we got to keep moving here. So thanks to the governance, leadership, and communication team. And now we need the organizational change management team.
Of course, we're saving the best for last. So we're going to wrap this up in just as soon as we can. So those of you, just come on a little bit closer so we feel the love up here. We're going to talk a little bit more about the change management, and then we're going to wrap right after that. So those in the back, come on down. And, well, not a lightning round so much, but this is the glue that holds stuff together. This is the glue that makes it happen. So let me turn it over to Stefan to start.
You got it? You wanted the speakers?
We actually had two tables. Were you at the other table? These right here? Okay. Okay. So, we had two tables both talking on this. I'll communicate for our table first, and then we have one to go after that. And I have a feeling we'll probably reiterate a lot of the same things. So organizational change management, the way we viewed this was how can this support overall the implementation aspect of interoperability across health and human services. And actually at first we were a little confused. Is this us trying to recommend how HHS as a federal agency, what recommendations could we give to them as far as for organizational change management, or is it just like health and human services in general as far as the field goes? So we tailored a little bit so it could be used either way. But we try to stick to 3, have 4, but we'll go over this quickly. So this is really built on the foundation of actually the last group that went. So if you don't have a great framework of governance, leadership, and communications in place, and you're going to see some of the same themes reiterated here, then it's not going to work anyhow. So you have to know what the framework of governance is that you're going to operate within. You got to have strong leadership and obviously communication throughout it. So the first main area that we had was communicate a clear vision. Sound familiar? On what whether it's HHS as a field or HHS as an organization, communicating that clear vision for what interoperability is, and that also helps to identify the roles of all the various stakeholders, so they get buy-in into the process. They can see how they fit in within this larger vision. Use these. Yours are probably better. The second aspect here, and I'm going to look at both of my notes here, is on in that communicating the clear vision. Once you have that kind of developed, and a good example of a vision like that would be the Health Data Initiative. I don't know if Damon's still around, but it was a great job as far as them mapping out exactly how they're going to do things in a transparent way, allows people to pick that apart, figure out where they fit within that process, et cetera. But then you have to have kind of a communication dissemination plan for that vision and figure out all the different venues, developing toolkits, implementation plans, some of the other things that resource portals, workshops, webinars, a place where you can archive all of these different activities, and then figure out, again, how you're going to disseminate that throughout all those different stakeholder groups. And then also, I would say that would include opportunities for inclusion from all stakeholders at whether it's the development phase, implementation phase, making sure that you have the opportunity for people to participate in the development and implementation so they actually can help take some ownership for it. Sharing early successes and developing champions and empowering them. So leadership needs to be able to identify who those champions are going to be at a very ground level. So they're not, so the people we're trying to convince to embrace this new vision, they're not just hearing it from the boss at the top of the chain, but they're also hearing it from the person next to them that they work with day in, day out, who can help communicate it in a way that they better understand it. And then sharing those early successes, those quick wins early on, making sure that you're promoting those, again, through a communication plan. Making sure that people are seeing that there's real tangible results happening. This isn't just another project that we're continuing to work on and plan on forever. A lot of talk but no action. And then the last piece was tied to technology. So it says here, create a single federal portal for health and human services across multiple federal agencies. And this really has to do with if you're going to ask them to, if you're going to ask program staff or different stakeholders to embrace this new vision and this of interoperability, you got to make it as easy as possible for them, make it as least disruptive to their daily work. If anything, it should be improving their daily work. So creating a single portal is one way of doing that, where essentially they have one place to go. It makes it easier for them to stay in tune with everything that's going on with the implementation of the project. So, and those are kind of the four main areas. So. Okay. I think those are the main areas that we hit on. So, do you want?
Okay. The group actually, there weren't enough people for the fourth group on privacy, so we kind of brought a little bit of that in as well for our group. But first, I would say, I think part of, if you don't already have a governance structure in place and you're proposing to implement one, that is going to involve some change management probably as you begin to look at roles and so forth. So some of these I think are going to be very similar to or kind of overlap a little bit with some of what we heard from the governance group. So the first one we had is relates to the procurement comments that were made earlier about government technology interoperability. Procurements must include funding and tasks that specify the change management that's needed. That's our first one. Yep. And second one is on standards. Is the need, as we talked about, in order for this to work, there needs to be some common definitions and standards. And while the NEAM structure is very useful, but there's some additional things that we need to make it work in the health and human services area. So we thought of the need for a designated organization to promote the development of common standards for interoperability. That's our second one. And the third one is looking again at the current capabilities under current legal framework for exchanging data and looking at opportunities where we could do more, even within the current legal framework, to create, for example, creating a model for waivers, for example, in terms of who should have access to certain kinds of data, to promote the improvement in delivery of treatment. We're talking about people who provide treatment directly to clients and so forth, a more holistic approach, as we've talked about over the last couple of days, between your medical treatment, your therapist, your caseworker, and so forth. But then also looking at opportunities for changes that may be needed in the laws to make it, to extend that further so that we can provide the kind of data to the treatment workers that would allow them to make better decisions about the kind of treatments that they're recommending for their clients. So those are the three that we have.
Okay, any comments or clarifications from the team?
On the change management piece, where we're recommending that procurements include dollars and tasks for change management, based on what we heard from Mikey yesterday, it's important to get end users and consumers involved in this process also. It's not just users and government, vendors and that sort of thing. That's the procurements, yeah, that one there, yeah.
Thank you. Representing the local agency of all these many higher level federal folks and so forth here, it's kind of interesting to look at the perspective we have, because we talk about interoperability at the federal level and sharing information and so forth, and kind of echoing the thoughts that were just given. From the local level, the end user perspective, data coming down is great because it helps us identify some of the trends, and from a management perspective, it's great and so forth. But when you look at the worker in the field, putting more data on top maybe helps them in their discovery assessment processes, but does it really give them different tools of how to do the business? So as we begin thinking about the worker and the holistic perspective and so forth, how do we give them a different set of tools in their toolkit that they can go at the single portal, the capacity for their data to reach upward, not just data coming down? All those pieces I think are real important for us to not lose sight of.
Anything else?
I would just build on that and say that I heard significant discussion around the tables on each of those topics, and that could be wrapped into a single entity that might be responsible for providing all of those tools, and making sure that all of those tools are used, in fact, and brought to bear against something like a charter statement or something like a governance statement on a project level basis. But outside of the project level basis, all of these kinds of activities have to take place on a program level basis as well. I heard people talking about that, but kind of when you're trying to boil it down to 3 sticky notes, it's kind of tough to bring all of that back.
Sure. Yep.
And the only thing I wanted to add was, in terms of the single portal, a lot of change management is happening at the state and local levels, but we're not really seeing that at the federal level. And I just think from a change management perspective, you'll get a lot more buy-in from our sister agencies and programs at the state levels if we see some of that change happening at the federal level. And a good example is the fact that we have to go through so many, we share as common clients between Human Services, USDA, HUD, education, and none of that data at the federal level is being shared so that we can actually leverage it and be able to use it in a much more efficient way. So definitely want to see that, that thinking happening at the federal level as well.
I was just thinking, actually, it's really, if we're going to put it into 3 areas or 3 buckets, maybe one way of doing it, and this isn't as specific or drilled down, but just to kind of think about the different tasks you have to do, if you could focus it in 3 different ways, might be good. And it all comes around making it easy, right? And so the first part would be making it easy to understand, making it easy to identify with, because those are 2 very different things. You can understand it but not identify with it. And then the third one is the easy to get it done. And that comes with the toolkits, the portal, things like that. So easy to understand, easy to identify with, and easy to get it done. And hopefully you'll see better change management that way.
Jerry, I was just
go
going to pitch in. There are a couple things that I think here. We've seen tremendous changes, and I think all of us have, as we've gone through a lot of the ACA-mediated stuff, issues related to budgets, accountability, what have you, and so change has sort of become the constant. And I think that you have to create some sort of a culture that's going to accept that when you make changes, the performance isn't going to be what it was for a while. And what the feedback that we get is, well, our workers get really frustrated because you've made all these changes, and they used to do it this way, and they were really good at it. Now they're really bad at a new system. And so the culture has to be accepting that not everyone's going to change at the same level, and you're going to have to give it some time to work. And that's not necessarily what we're used to doing when we are used to doing, you do this, and so I think you have to allow for that culturally. The next piece is training. You mentioned communication here, and I think, Stephen, you were getting a little closer to it, but we found with our new eligibility system and the MAGI rules, that what we needed was training. And you can start training early. We were on a compressed timetable, but if you train in June for something that isn't going to be available till October, nobody remembers it. And so you have to have tremendous resources devoted to the training and the education piece. That continues on. I think if we look at our failures in the MAGI, or at least what I would consider weaknesses, it's the helping people get good at this new paradigm is really good. And I'm not sure where I saw in here your evaluation of the result. You've got to change. It's a loop, and call it quality improvement or whatever, but somehow you got to loop back to the beginning, because I don't think you just use change and say we're done. But you need to tell us how would you know you were successful when you got to the end of that, and then go back and make your corrections, which inevitably will have to be made. Just some thoughts.
Well, first, I guess I would suggest that everybody not be afraid of radical change, because clearly we're talking about turning some of this stuff upside down. We want to share data. We want to have shared services instead of the silos. I mean, you're not talking about small change here. So you've just got to, I guess, before you go about these changes, you have to assess it. You have to look at your constraints, your assumptions about where you are and where you want to be, and the risks involved in taking and making that change. I mean, look at what it has. Sit down in a room and actually spend a little while and think about what that change looks like a year from now, 2 years from now. Is it going to be effective? Or are we going to have to take a little right-hand turn, a little course correction? But if you don't think about it and you just make a statement that we need to do business differently, and you just push forward with that, you're probably not going to have buy-in from the stakeholders. You're probably not going to, all you're going to do is have a top-down approach to something that may or may not work. So you need to actually try to predict the future before you actually implement any changes in that regard. I'm with Jess. I'm always a bit cynical about change just for the sake of change. I don't think that's a necessary thing. I think we can sometimes just nibble around the edges and be much more successful at it. But one of the things that you're talking about that's one of your problems with change is having to figure out just in time, as opposed to you talk about your June, but implementation in October. Part of that is that forward look about change and where am I going to be? And let's build in a little bumper that says we're going to expect 20% delay, no matter what. So let's not, stick to some firm schedule that says October, because it may end up being January of the following year. What do you do then? Now you've blown your schedule again. So part of that has to be in that change management process.
I think there's we could take it up maybe a level or two. In addition to all the things that Joe just said we have to do, and this is a conversation that I had a little bit earlier with an interloper in the group. I'm looking back here to Ann, who was in the group for a little bit. It's difficult, if not impossible at this stage in time, to establish value for these activities. There isn't, I would say, a ubiquitous value established for the kinds of things that we're talking about, the kinds of things that you were talking about, Joe, and how much that costs in terms of time and energy to have those sorts of discussions that lead to some sort of a vision that then drives the activities that you enumerated. So that is, at a slightly higher level, an establishment of value that needs to be recognized across the spectrum. I know in California, we don't necessarily recognize that this notion of organizational change management as a necessary thing. You know, it's almost implied. You know, here's a big pot of money. Here's a programmatic objective. Go get it done. And, you know, it isn't always recognized that you have a series of steps that you need to go through in some sort of cogent fashion to get to the feedback loop, and then the measurement of all of that, and to make sure that you are able to sustain that.
Yeah, the federal government understands change. I mean, our office, we've changed our name twice since I've been in the government. We have gone through 5 reorganizations in ACF, and before that, Family Support Administration. So yeah, we get change, and a lot of times those changes were for change's sake, because we had a different administration, and that was the only purpose. Everybody had to get a reorg on their resume before they went to the next job.
This is Mark. I work in SACWIS, Child Welfare. Folks know what SACWIS is, right? No. Change management, OCM, that's huge in our area. We want, anybody hear about return on investment? We want the systems to work for the users, the end users. We want them to be engaged. They have to be engaged from the beginning all the way to the end and ongoing. Talk about communication plan. It has to be a bi-directional communication plan. It's just not dissemination of information from the project, but also the project hearing from the user community. So we are into a very iterative model. We want to hear from the community. We want to continue to modify the systems ongoing. As I've mentioned before, SACWIS systems are not, well, I've said this many times, SACWIS systems are not stale. They continue to migrate. They're dynamic systems, and that continues on using technology.
Any final comments, Kathy? I'll come to you.
My knees. It occurred to me, this is just a thought, and please don't anybody throw anything at me when I say this. It has to do with standards a little bit. But, you know, we started the symposium off talking about change over time. And what we're talking about here is really a traditional growth curve. Like you would see in business or industry, happens in government, and initiated by an event. And in my mind, the last 9 years have been part of the event as we move along. The thing I notice is that, you know, when you hit the top of the growth curve, there's another event. So something else happens that causes innovation. And so my question is, and it's just a thought, is a group of common standards something that could impact the ability to innovate when you hit the top of the growth? Just a thought.
Any?
I was going to react to the statement as far as whether a group of standards tend to hinder or promote innovation. I would argue a lot of standards tend to hinder innovation. If you look at the Industrial Revolution all the way down to where we find ourselves today, even like car rental industry, taxi cab industries, typically standards lag behind what is happening in the marketplace. So when, as regulators or as a government, we create tight standards, we end up stifling innovation. And it remains to be seen if that is going to change.
I'd like to, I want to, okay, maybe in terms of innovation, but in terms of IT systems, standards for us make better systems. Getting states to go out there and look at IEEE standards, ANSI standards, bring those into the procurement instruments, make better systems all the way down from the line. lessens ambiguity. It makes a better mission, better product at the end of the day. In terms of innovation, I don't know about that.
Can you imagine a U.S. highway system without standards? You know, I mean, those types of, can you imagine a railroad system? They tried it in Australia with 2 different gauges that didn't match, doesn't work real well. Those are issues where standards can help, but I think you can't be hostage to your standards. You create them, they work. When they stop working, you change them. But you try to migrate them and develop them over time. But yes, I think there is a balance that goes on constantly between trying to create things that'll permit. We should speak the same language, right? That's a standard so that we can communicate, and our language evolves.
One more comment in the back. Lisa?
When I think of innovation and standards, the metaphor that was once used was the fire hydrants, the great fire that actually happened right here in Baltimore. I want to say 1912, but I don't remember the year. And it was such a huge fire that fire trucks came from Philadelphia and all over the place. And when they arrived, they were unable to be helpful because the interlockings between the fire hydrants to the water to the actual hoses were different. And so you had fire trucks that came that were unable to save lives because they didn't have an interoperable system. And when I think about that, now we have that standardized all across the country. So anywhere you go, the same fire hydrant, the same fire hose can go into the same system, and you can put out the fires. And I think that's where we are right now in the social services industry. We have fires among us. And I think that we don't yet have a way to view the data and the data visualization to see how bad the fires are. But that once we see the data and we can see those patterns, we're going to see how bad the fires are and how necessary we need those interlocking systems. We have the ability to put them out.
I think that's a fitting sort of conclusion about what we're trying to do here is to try to create some of those standards so that we have a common language, we have some common understanding of the challenges and the opportunities, and that we hope that this event sort of contributed to that idea of a place that is able to create some standards in terms of our thinking processes and in the way we go forward.